The physics of emotional frequency, a personal reality beyond conventional understanding. Introduction, a different kind of being in a human world. There are individuals born into human society who do not identify with the typical emotional or energetic patterns that define most human interactions. They may look human, speak like others, live among others, but their internal experience of life, energy, and emotion is fundamentally different. This article reflects one such reality. The experience of being a person whose energetic makeup seems incompatible with the emotional projections of others, and whose sensitivity to those projections is not only emotional, but physical, palpable, and deeply painful. This is not a metaphor. It's not a poetic expression of being highly sensitive. It's a literal energetic condition, and for those who live it, it can feel like walking through invisible radiation fields every time someone gets angry, fearful, or emotionally volatile. Part 1. The fontanelle and the hollow bell, a form of human diversity that changes everything. One often overlooked aspect of human diversity is the physiological sensitivity to emotional energy, and the structural, neurological, and energetic differences that shape it. The author of this piece lives with one such difference. At birth, every human has a fontanelle, the soft spot on the top of the skull that allows for growth and movement of the brain and bones. In most people, this closes entirely within the first couple of years of life, as the cranial plates fuse and the skull becomes more structurally rigid. But in some individuals, the fontanelle never fully closes, or it closes differently. This can be subtle and often goes unrecognized by standard medicine. Yet the implications are profound. For those of us with this configuration, the skull functions more like a resonant chamber, an instrument rather than a helmet. Like a hollow bell, the cranial structure doesn't block incoming energy. It receives it, amplifies it, rings with it. This isn't poetic metaphor. It's physics. It's structural resonance. Sound travels differently through open space than it does through dense matter. Energy moves more freely through vessels that are attuned to vibration. And when emotional energy, particularly the kind emitted unconsciously or forcefully by others, enters the environment, our systems don't just sense it. We register it. We amplify it. We feel it in high-definition detail, in our heads, our hearts, our skin, our bones. You don't just notice that someone is angry. You hear the tone of it in your body. You don't just intuit resentment. You feel the static of it pressing against your thoughts. You don't just empathize with fear, you absorb the residue of it in your gut. This is not being sensitive in the casual sense. It's not emotional fragility. It's a structural and energetic difference in how we interface with the world. And that difference can be life-giving or life-threatening depending on how others respond to it. Part 2. Emotional energy as measurable phenomenon. While mainstream science is still catching up to the full complexity of how emotional states affect the body's energetic output, growing research across neuroscience, physics, and traditional systems is providing measurable, physiological evidence that emotions do have real vibrational and electromagnetic signatures, and that we affect and are affected by the emotional fields around us. Emotions are not just private experiences trapped inside the mind. They have measurable effects on the body and the surrounding environment, particularly in terms of electromagnetic and physiological signals. Both the heart and the brain emit electromagnetic fields that can be measured using sensitive instruments like ECG for the heart and EEG for the brain. The heart's field is especially strong. It's about 100 times more powerful electrically and up to 5,000 times more powerful magnetically than the brain's. This field radiates outward from the body and can be detected several feet away. In environments where people are physically close, these fields can interact, meaning our emotional states may subtly influence those around us at a physiological level. One of the clearest ways this shows up is in heart rate variability, HRV, the variation in time between heartbeats, and in what's called heart-brain coherence. HRV is highly sensitive to emotional states. When we're experiencing emotions like gratitude, compassion, or calmness, the heart's rhythm becomes smooth and ordered, creating what's called a coherent state. In contrast, stress, anger, or anxiety lead to erratic, disordered patterns. This coherence, or lack thereof, affects the nervous system, hormone levels, and even brain function, and it's not just happening internally. These patterns of coherence or incoherence also shape the electromagnetic field we emit into our environment. On a deeper level, ideas from quantum biology and quantum coherence suggest that living systems depend on orderly, resonant states to function well, and that exposure to chaotic input can disturb that order. In quantum systems, coherence refers to the synchronized behavior of particles or energy. When coherence is lost, known as decoherence, the system becomes disordered. While emotions aren't quantum, in the technical sense, the principle still applies. Chaotic emotional projections, such as unprocessed anger or aggression, can act as a disordering influence in a system, especially in relational or shared energetic spaces. In addition to the electromagnetic and energetic impact, the human nervous system is wired to detect and respond to others' emotional states through mirror neurons, specialized cells that activate in the brain when we observe someone else's emotional expression, posture, or movement. This means that, to some degree, the body reacts to other people's emotions as if they were our own. For highly sensitive or attuned individuals, this response is especially strong. It explains why being in the presence of someone emotionally chaotic or aggressive can cause discomfort, anxiety, or even physical symptoms, even when no direct interaction is taking place. All of this paints a picture that's increasingly difficult to dismiss. Emotions are energetic events that have physiological signatures, measurable impacts, and the ability to influence other systems, human and environmental, around them. While not all of these effects are fully understood within conventional Western science, a growing body of interdisciplinary research is confirming what many have long sensed intuitively. Emotional energy is real and it matters. Part 3. Being a non-emitter in a world of projectors. A core element of this experience, especially for people who are highly sensitive, disabled, or have survived long-term trauma, is the way emotional energy functions not just internally, but outwardly. It's not just about how you feel your emotions, but how you emit them, and how others are affected by what you put into the shared emotional field. Some people, especially those with certain kinds of privilege or neurotypical wiring, can go through life unaware of the impact their emotional emissions have on others. They can project anger, shame, fear, or contempt into a room and never feel the reverberation. They assume it's normal or worse, justified. But for others, particularly the deeply sensitive, the disabled, the chronically ill, the marginalized, this kind of emotional leakage is not only unsafe, it's often physically and psychologically unsustainable. When your system is highly sensitive, either neurologically or energetically, you don't just register your own emotions, you absorb the emotional signals of others, whether you want to or not. And because of that, your body becomes its own form of regulation. Cannot afford to be chaotic. If you were to radiate unchecked rage or contempt the way others do, your system would implode. It would fry your nervous system, so you learn, often very young and very fast, to contain, modulate, or transmute your emotional signals with incredible precision. This isn't because you're naturally calm or conflict avoidant. It's because your body, your brain, and your survival strategy have required you to be hyper-aware of what you're emitting. For people who live in disabled bodies or high-threat environments, emotionally, socially, or physically, staying emotionally coherent becomes a necessity. There is no luxury of emotional recklessness. In fact, many disabled or trauma-impacted individuals develop an advanced form of emotional control, not in the repressive sense, but in the sense of real-time energetic discipline. They learn to stay aware of not only what they feel, but what kind of signal it's sending into their environment, because they know, often through painful experience, that what they emit will come back tenfold. They have been punished for simply existing in emotional truth. So they adapt. They refine. They hold the line. This adaptation often goes completely unrecognized by others. In fact, those who do the most work to regulate their emotional emissions are often the ones accused of being too sensitive, overreactive, or dramatic, when in reality, they are often absorbing, diffusing, or neutralizing energy that others are unconsciously radiating. It's important to understand that this isn't just a personality trait or spiritual orientation. It's a biological and relational survival skill. And while it's often pathologized in clinical settings or dismissed socially, it's actually a form of intelligence. Emotional and energetic coherence, the ability to feel deeply without broadcasting harm, is one of the most powerful, least recognized forms of strength a human being can develop. What's painful, though, is that people who have learned to live this way, carefully, responsibly, and consciously, are often surrounded by people who do the opposite. People who radiate unchecked emotional chaos, blame others for their own internal state, and offload their discomfort without any awareness of how it affects those around them. And yet, because the world is often structured to reward loudness, dominance, and certainty, rather than sensitivity, presence, or truth, the ones who are most careful with their energy are the ones who get misunderstood or sidelined. So let's be clear. If you don't emit harmful emotional energy, if you don't radiate shame, contempt, or fear that sticks to others, it's not because you don't feel deeply. It's because your system, whether by design or by adaptation, has learned that such emissions are toxic not only to others but to yourself. Your body knows the cost of energetic incoherence. It has lived the consequences, and so it has become wise in ways the world rarely acknowledges, and almost never understands. This creates a dissonance in human environments. When you are around others who are unconsciously radiating harmful emotional frequencies, and they assume everyone is doing the same, your neutrality is perceived as wrong, false, or even threatening. And when you try to explain that you're not emitting these harmful fields, people often assume you're just like everyone else, denying the real physical difference in your system. This mismatch is devastating, not just emotionally but physically. Part 4. The cost of denial and the reality of harm. For someone living with this kind of sensitivity, continued exposure to harmful emotional energy leads to real consequences. Dysautonomia, a dysregulated nervous system, often including persistent tachycardia, rapid heart rate, orthostatic intolerance, and chronic fatigue. This is not just from internal dysregulation, it's from constant energetic assault. Neurological and structural damage. The continued bombardment of high-intensity emotional frequencies can create or exacerbate structural vulnerabilities, like head pain, cranial collapse, sensory overload, emotional isolation and despair, being gaslit by reality, by science, by community, and even by well-meaning spiritual people leads to a kind of existential despair that is hard to put into words. And so, it becomes clear, this is not just an emotional experience. It is a physical, energetic one. And when people refuse to acknowledge that, it isn't just frustrating, it's dangerous. Part 5. Why finding somewhere else is not the answer. A common piece of advice given to highly sensitive people, neurodivergent individuals, and trauma survivors is to find your tribe. As if the answer to chronic misattunement and harm is to just gather with others like you and stay out of the way. It sounds nice on the surface, but underneath it reveals a dangerous assumption. That the world is not responsible for making space for sensitivity, and that those who are more energetically or emotionally sensitive should simply remove themselves to avoid disrupting the status quo. This is not inclusion. This is exile dressed up as empowerment. The truth is, there is nowhere for most sensitive people to go. There is no secret haven where all the disabled, chronically ill, neurodivergent, and trauma-aware people can magically support each other while the rest of the world continues unchecked. That's a fantasy, one that conveniently allows dysfunctional systems to avoid ever-changing. Suggesting that the sensitive should just find their own space is, at its core, a form of discrimination. It says, you don't belong here unless you're willing to tolerate harm. It's a rejection of fundamental humanity, and it perpetuates the myth that only certain nervous systems are valid, usually the ones that are less reactive, less expressive, or less affected by emotional dissonance. But sensitivity is not a flaw. It is a signal. And when society ignores that signal, it moves further out of integrity. We cannot continue to cast out the most sensitive, the ones who feel the impact of aggression, disconnection, and emotional dishonesty most acutely, and then claim to care about justice, inclusion, or human rights. You cannot build a compassionate society by telling its most emotionally intelligent members to go fend for themselves. The real solution is not pushing sensitive people out. It's expanding our collective capacity to make room for them, to listen, to slow down, to tolerate the discomfort of growth and recognize that many of our social norms are built on the suppression of emotional truth. We need a society that is not just technically accessible, but emotionally hospitable. One where sensitivity isn't seen as a disruption, but as a kind of leadership. One where the burden of adaptation doesn't always fall on the people already carrying the heaviest weight. Because let's be honest, many of us, especially those who are neurodivergent, disabled, or systemically marginalized, simply do not have the luxury of self-isolation. We can't all live in the woods or form tiny co-ops and expect our needs to be met. We need care systems, infrastructure, belonging. We need to be integrated, not hidden. To exile the sensitive is to exile the canaries in the coal mine. And when you silence the warning signs, you don't make the danger go away. You just make it easier to ignore until it collapses everything. So no, finding community isn't the answer, unless that community is willing to face itself, to grow, and to actually include those it finds most inconvenient. Because inclusion is not about comfort. It's about courage. The right to exist as you are. You have the right to exist without interference from harmful energy. Full stop. Not just physical harm, but emotional, energetic, and vibrational harm. The kind that scrambles your nervous system, disorients your perception, and makes you feel like you're the problem for simply not tolerating dysfunction. That's not weakness, that's intelligence. Your system is alert to what many have been trained to ignore. Society must begin to develop the awareness to distinguish between someone who is simply standing in their truth, even when it's uncomfortable or emotionally intense, and someone who is projecting harm, chaos, or emotional distortion and blaming others for it. These are not the same thing. But because society lacks the sensitivity to tell the difference, it often rewards the abuser and scapegoats the one who feels what's actually happening. That's not just unfair. It's dangerous, because it inverts accountability. It teaches people that if they're loud, confident, or charismatic enough, they can destabilize others and then blame them for the impact. And it teaches sensitive people that if they respond, speak up, or protect themselves, they're being too much. But you are not too much. You are simply attuned to a reality that others have shut themselves off from. This is why so many deeply sensitive, neurodivergent, or trauma-informed people struggle with the idea of being human. Because to be human, in the cultural sense, has come to mean accepting a deeply dysfunctional paradigm. One that normalizes emotional dishonesty, denies the body's wisdom, and treats empathy like a liability. In that context, of course you might not feel human. Of course you might not relate to the species. Not because you are broken, but because what's considered normal is. You may not see yourself in the systems around you. You may not see yourself in the people who call you difficult, dramatic, or damaged for feeling what's real. But your perception is not flawed, it is refined. Your experience is not a glitch, it is a signal. You are not broken, you are operating on a different frequency. One that this world has not yet made room for, but must, if it wants to claim any real evolution. Whether or not you identify as human, you are conscious. You are aware. You are intelligent, not in the way institutions measure it, but in the way truth recognizes itself, through integrity, perception, and presence. And you have a right to live as you are, to feel what you feel, to name what harms you even when others deny it exists, to protect your system, to refuse to twist yourself into something more tolerable just to make dysfunction feel comfortable. You don't have to become like them. They have to learn how to see you. Because until this world evolves enough to hold people like you, people who feel, it cannot call itself just or humane or conscious. The harmful impact of emotional energy. Why sensitivity isn't the problem. Unawareness is. A different kind of sensitivity. In a world where emotional expression is often misunderstood, mismanaged, or outright denied, there are people for whom emotional energy isn't just a feeling. It's an environmental factor. It's a physical force, one that can hurt. Some of us live with a type of energetic sensitivity that most of society isn't even aware exists. For us, emotions, especially harmful, chaotic, or aggressive ones, aren't abstract. They cause measurable effects on the body. Heart rate spikes, dysautonomia, neurological dysregulation, physical pain. These are not psychosomatic reactions. They are energetic impacts, and they are very real. This article explains how emotional energy works, why some people feel it more than others, and how ignoring this truth is damaging us all. It also proposes a radical yet logical solution, designing a device that can detect and map harmful emotional projections, so we can finally see what sensitive people have been experiencing all along. Part 1. how emotional energy actually works. We've all felt it, walking into a room where someone's angry or anxious, and the air feels heavy. But for most people, that's where the awareness ends. For others, especially those with hypersensitive systems, that emotional energy doesn't just affect the mood, it physically invades their system. Let's break down what's actually happening. Emotions are physical events. Every emotional state triggers a physiological chain reaction. Heart rate changes. Breath rate adjusts. Hormones surge, cortisol, adrenaline. Brainwaves shift. Electromagnetic fields from heart and brain subtly change. These reactions are not only internal, they are emitted outward into the surrounding space as vibrations and low-frequency electromagnetic waves. The human heart, for instance, creates an electromagnetic field that can be measured up to several feet away. This frequency changes with emotional state, calmness, anger, fear, love, and so on. This is not spiritual metaphor, it's basic biophysics. Energy fields interact. When people are near each other, their emotional fields overlap and influence one another. This is called energetic entrainment. It's part of how empathy works. But when someone emits chaotic or unresolved emotional energy, like suppressed anger or blame, it can disrupt the coherence of another person's energy field. Especially if that person is more open or sensitive, this feels not like a mood, but a literal invasion. Think of it like secondhand smoke. Just because you're not smoking doesn't mean you're not breathing it in. For sensitive systems, it's not optional. Some people are built like emotional tuning forks. Their nervous systems are so open, their sensitivity so extreme, that they can't not feel what's around them. For them, harmful emotional projections from others don't just feel uncomfortable. They can cause actual harm, dysregulated heart rhythm, tachycardia, bradycardia, nervous system crashes, dysautonomia, collapsing muscle tone, nausea, migraines, long-term autoimmune or neurological effects. This isn't overreacting, it's overexposing. Just like radiation, even a small dose of toxic emotional energy, repeated over time, can destabilize a system that's especially receptive. Part 2. When you don't emit what others project. There's another layer to this experience. Some people are so finely attuned and have spent so much time learning to regulate themselves that they simply don't emit the same kind of emotional toxicity that others do. You might call this being non-projective. It means you don't externalize unresolved emotion. You don't unconsciously discharge emotional chaos into others. You don't radiate hurtful energetic frequencies, even when under stress. In fact, people like this can't afford to. Their systems are so sensitive that if they projected harmful emotional energy outward, it would boomerang back and hurt themselves. So they've learned to live in complete energetic discipline. They've trained themselves to feel everything but not project harm. But here's the problem. Some people don't believe that's possible. So when a sensitive person reacts to someone else's emotional projection, the projector often assumes, "You're just overreacting. You're projecting. It's your sensitivity." This leads to false blame, gaslighting, and energetic assault. All because the projector doesn't realize the harm they're emitting. Part 3. Society's blind spot, and why it's hurting everyone. Western and modern culture is emotionally immature in one critical way. It treats emotions as private, unmeasurable, and unaccountable. You're allowed to be angry, and if someone gets hurt, it's their problem. You can passive-aggressively radiate shame or control, and no one calls it what it is. Empaths or sensitive people are expected to toughen up, rather than others learning to regulate their emotions. This leaves sensitive people in danger. But it also hurts society in larger ways. Families pass down trauma instead of healing it. Workplaces become emotionally toxic, affecting physical health and productivity. Politics and media thrive on fear and outrage, which radiate harmful emotional frequencies into the collective field. If we keep ignoring the energetic cost of emotional projection, we will continue to breed disconnection, illness, and systems built on domination rather than coherence. Part 4. The solution. A device to detect harmful emotional energy. What if we could build a device to detect emotional energy in real time? Not just metaphorically, a real scientific wearable tool that could identify and measure harmful emotional projections in the environment. Imagine being able to track the physiological impact of someone's emotional field the same way we monitor blood pressure or air quality. This tool would give visible, undeniable evidence to what sensitive people already know. Emotional energy is not abstract. It's tangible. It has patterns, rhythms, weight, and direction. It can regulate or destabilize, heal or harm. And we are all contributing to this shared field, whether we're aware of it or not. Next, we'll continue with the description of the proposed device, the emotional frequency detection and impact monitor, along with how it would work, what it would show, and how it would reshape collective understanding. The solution: a device to detect harmful emotional energy. Introducing the EFDM, Emotional Frequency Detection and Impact Monitor. A proposed invention that integrates multiple biosensing technologies to detect, quantify, and visualize emotional energy in real time. It bridges biofeedback, physics, neuroscience, and emerging AI to reveal the invisible emotional landscape we move through every day. How it would work. The EFDM would use a blend of existing and emerging technologies. Heart rate variability, HRV sensors to detect stress, coherence, and nervous system state, EEG and EMF field detectors to read brainwave activity and electromagnetic output from the body, infrared thermal imaging to track shifts in skin temperature and blood flow, emotional arousal, skin conductance and breath sensors to measure subtle emotional activation, directional EM field mapping to pinpoint the source of energetic output in a space, AI emotion recognition through voice tone, microexpressions, and gesture analysis. Together, these inputs would cross-reference each other to map not only what emotional energy is present, but where it's coming from and how it's affecting others nearby. What it would show. Real-time energy map. A radar-style visual of emotional frequencies being emitted in your space. Harm index, 0 to 10. How destabilizing or regulating each emotional signature is, based on physical impact data. Directional alert, where the energetic disruption is originating from. Resonance clash detector, identifies mismatches between your system and incoming emotional frequencies, even subtle ones. Why it would matter. Such a device could revolutionize how we understand social interactions, power dynamics, trauma, and collective regulation. It would validate the experience of sensitive individuals, encourage real emotional accountability in shared spaces, make visible what many deny, that emotional energy is real and has measurable impact, offer training tools for empathy, coherence, and self-regulation, shift how we approach education, therapy, justice, healthcare, and even policy. And the truth is, this isn't science fiction. Every core technology already exists. What we lack is not the science. It's the will to treat emotional harm as seriously as we treat secondhand smoke, environmental toxins, or noise pollution. But here's the twist. We don't need to wait for a machine, because you are the invention. Turning inward. The inner EFDM. Every human being is born with an internal version of this device. We all have the sensory apparatus to detect emotional energy, to tell when something feels grounding versus when it scrambles us. We call this intuition, gut feeling, sensitivity, empathy, but it's more than metaphor. It's real-time biofeedback filtered through your nervous system. Over time, many people lose touch with this inner compass. Social conditioning teaches us to override it, to tolerate what feels wrong, to silence the impulse to walk away, to laugh at what hurts, to rationalize the weight in our chest when someone says they're just being honest. But your body never stops telling you the truth. And the solution is not to build dependence on a machine. It's to rebuild the internal sensor to remember how to listen. How you rebuild your inner emotional detection system. Start with the body. It's always the first place emotional energy lands. Notice your breath. Does it speed up, shallow out, or drop when someone enters the room? Check your gut. Do you feel expansion or contraction? Track your heart rate. Does it spike in response to someone's tone or proximity? Tune into your skin. Do you feel heat, cold, pressure, or tingling when someone is speaking? This is data. This is you sensing energy. From there, ask, Is what I'm feeling coming from me or at me? Am I resonating with someone's truth or defending myself from their projection? Do I feel clearer, safer, more alive in their presence, or drained, destabilized, or foggy? Takes practice, but it is not difficult. This ability is innate. It's just been buried under social rules, self-doubt, and the pressure to conform. And once you reclaim it, something incredible happens. You no longer rely on others to define reality for you. You feel it directly through your own system. You begin to discern cleanly, without judgment, the difference between emotional presence and emotional pollution. You build your own instrument, and that instrument, once tuned, can tell you more about who's safe, who's congruent, and who's blaming you for what lives in them than any logic ever could. So yes, maybe one day we will build a tool like the FDIM to measure emotional energy, and it will change the world. But even if that tool never gets built, you can still change your world by learning to trust the one that lives inside you. Because you've always had it. You just weren't taught to trust it. But now you can. Part 5. What a world with this awareness would look like. Imagine a world where emotional energy is treated with the same seriousness as physical safety. A world where the invisible impact of our emotional projections is acknowledged, respected, and skillfully regulated, not through repression, but through awareness. In this world, emotional responsibility becomes cultural literacy, not a niche concept reserved for therapists or spiritual seekers, but a fundamental skill set taught from the earliest stages of life. In this world, parents are supported, not shamed, in learning how to calm and regulate themselves before speaking to their children. They understand that children absorb emotional tone far more than content. So the home becomes a field of resonance, not repression. Schools teach emotional frequency and body awareness alongside reading and math. Children learn to notice when their system is dysregulated and are given tools to bring themselves back into balance. Emotional honesty is encouraged, not punished. Workplaces implement energy hygiene policies. Instead of ignoring the emotional climate, they measure and respond to it. Leaders are trained to recognize when they're unconsciously projecting stress or fear onto teams. Emotional check-ins are standard practice, not seen as a sign of weakness, but of integrity. Healthcare systems recognize that many physical symptoms, chronic illness, inflammation, hormonal imbalance, are downstream effects of unresolved emotional trauma. Doctors and therapists work collaboratively to treat the whole nervous system. Emotional trauma is no longer dismissed as just psychological, but honored as a root cause with biological consequences. Empaths and sensitive individuals are no longer scapegoated for taking things personally, but respected as early warning systems for environmental and relational imbalance. Their feedback is valued, not dismissed. Their sensitivity is seen as a gift, not a liability. Public policy reflects an understanding that emotional environments shape collective behavior. Urban planning, community support programs, even law enforcement are informed by emotional intelligence, not just data but energetic insight. This isn't idealism. This is a different kind of realism, one that acknowledges that emotions radiate. They don't stay locked inside us. They move outward. They shape space. They affect the health, behavior, and well-being of everyone nearby. And so we stop pretending that our moods are private. We stop justifying emotional leakage as just having a bad day. We stop labeling sensitivity as weakness and start seeing it as a kind of intelligence, one that has been underutilized and misunderstood for far too long. Because if we want a world that's less reactive, less violent, less chaotic, we have to stop treating emotional harm as invisible. We have to become aware of the fields we're all contributing to. And that shift begins with one simple truth. Emotions don't just happen. They radiate. And when we don't take responsibility for our emotional radiation, other people get hurt. The call for a new social contract. My experience is not a personal pathology. It's not a malfunction or an overreaction or a fragile temperament. It's a glimpse into what human society could be if we began to treat emotional energy with the same seriousness we give to physical force, chemical pollution, or public safety. This isn't about suppressing or shaming emotions. It's about ownership. if your body emits energy, if your emotions radiate into shared space, then you have a responsibility to understand, regulate, and take accountability for what you're putting into the collective field. Just like you'd be responsible for secondhand smoke. Just like you'd be responsible for noise pollution. Just like you'd be responsible for dumping chemicals into a river you share with others. The difference is that this field isn't visible, but it's felt by sensitive systems, by children, by animals, by bodies that haven't yet learned how to ignore their instincts. We've gone far too long pretending that emotional harm only exists when it becomes physical or verbal. But by the time it gets there, the energetic damage is often already done. So let's stop blaming sensitivity for reacting to what should not be ignored. Let's stop denying the harm that unresolved, unowned emotional energy causes, in homes, in workplaces, in communities, and in bodies. And instead, let's begin to build something new. A culture where emotional responsibility is expected, not resented. Where children are taught how to feel without harming. Where sensitivity is a form of wisdom, not a flaw. Where feedback from empathic people is listened to, not dismissed. Where we understand that being real does not mean being reckless. Where coherence, presence, and clarity are leadership qualities, not fringe ideals. Because once you learn to see the signal, you can learn to own the signal. And once you learn to own it, you can stop unconsciously radiating harm. You can choose to be a tuning fork for regulation, not disorder. And that changes everything. It's time for a new social contract, one that includes all of us. One that honors the invisible field we share, and demands nothing less than energetic integrity as a foundation for human life. Part 6. This is real. Emotional energy is a physical phenomenon, not a personal opinion. There's a dangerous myth embedded in modern culture, the belief that emotional energy is vague, internal, or purely psychological. That it's just a feeling you have, a private, optional experience that only matters if you choose to care about it. That belief is not only incorrect, it's harmful, because emotions are not abstract. They're not imaginary. They're not just in your head. They are physiological events, embodied, measurable, and energetically real. And when someone is emitting emotional energy, whether consciously or not, it impacts the people around them in ways that can be sensed, tracked, and for many of us, physically felt. Let's be completely clear. This is real. Not symbolic. Not poetic. Not subjective. Real. Emotional energy can be felt, tracked, and differentiated. There are individuals like myself who are born with or develop through necessity the ability to feel emotional energy as a direct sensory input. This is not a metaphor. It is not dissociation. It is not projection. It is sensation, clear and direct, like hearing a tone or touching a hot surface. We don't have to interpret it. We feel it. We feel the difference between a calm person and a person holding seething resentment under a smile, politeness that masks deep shame, performative kindness driven by control, fear masquerading as authority, confusion hidden beneath charisma, and empty spiritual language used to bypass real emotional discomfort. These energetic signatures aren't subtle to us, they're loud. They have weight, temperature, density, direction. They land on the body like sound pressure or static charge. We may feel them in the chest, the gut, the solar plexus, or the crown. Some of us even experience them like electric fields or gravitational pulls. And no, this is not imagination. It's not trauma acting up. It's not overthinking. It's not projection. It's direct input, raw, unfiltered, true. For people like me with neurological sensitivity, sensory processing differences, or structural energetic openness, such as a receptive fontanelle or high empathic wiring, emotional energy moves through our systems like sound through a microphone. It's not something we guess about. It's something we receive. And that reception allows for a kind of clarity that's not emotional but energetic. A knowing, this didn't start in me. This doesn't belong to me, but it's impacting me. And when we speak up, when we name the distortion or the aggression or the emotional pollution we're sensing, we are not making things up. We are reporting what is physiologically happening in a field that others have trained themselves to ignore. You don't have to be like us to recognize this. You don't need to be a hypersensitive or energetically receptive person to begin perceiving emotional energy. You just have to be willing to listen to what your body is already telling you. The tension in your jaw around certain people. The feeling of being on edge in certain spaces. The way your thoughts get scrambled near someone who insists they're calm. The headache you get in meetings that are polite, but full of subtle hostility. The way your shoulders drop the moment a safe person walks in. These are not coincidences. They are data. They are your system trying to tell you the truth about what's happening on an energetic level. The only difference between someone who can't feel energy and someone who can is often just this. One person has learned to trust the information. The other has learned to override it. The science behind it. We already have research that supports this, even if mainstream culture hasn't caught up. The HeartMath Institute has shown that the heart produces a measurable electromagnetic field that changes with emotional states and can influence people several feet away. Polyvagal theory explains how humans subconsciously detect safety and threat in each other's voices, posture, facial expression, and rhythm. Studies in mirror neurons and interpersonal neurobiology confirm that our brains literally mirror the emotions of others, even without conscious awareness. Biofield science, recognized by the NIH, investigates the energetic field around the body and how it changes with emotional and physiological states. We already have the science. What we're missing is the social acknowledgement of what that science means. The bottom line, you are not too sensitive for feeling emotional energy. You are attuned. And the more of us who stop pretending emotions are private, the more healing becomes possible, not just personally but collectively. Because emotional energy is not a personal opinion. It's a shared field. And when we start taking it seriously, we start taking each other seriously. Reactions are not the problem. Harmful emissions are. Let's make something clear. A reaction to harm is not the same thing as causing harm. A reactive nervous system is not a flaw. It's a response to something that disrupted safety, clarity, or coherence in the environment. Yet, in our culture, we often pathologize the reaction instead of addressing the source. We say, calm down, or you're overreacting, instead of asking, what caused this response in the first place? But this is the real question. What was the origination point of the energy? Who or what introduced the destabilizing signal into the space? Because that is what needs to be addressed. And no, this isn't about blaming people for feeling. It's about holding people accountable for the energy they emit, especially when it creates real, tangible harm for those around them. Tangible harm versus preference. Learn to know the difference. A key part of becoming emotionally responsible is learning to distinguish between a true energetic violation and something that just challenges your preferences or worldview. This is especially critical for people who have privilege or power in a space. Sometimes what feels uncomfortable is just someone else expressing their truth. That's not harm, that's your ego being stretched. But for many disabled, neurodivergent, or trauma-sensitive individuals, the reverse is true. What looks small to others, an interruption, a tone shift, a sudden demand, a loud emotional outburst, can trigger real physiological stress, loss of focus, disorientation, or energy depletion. This is not imaginary. It is tangible harm. Why? Because when your body or mind functions within a narrow window of energetic stability, any unexpected disruption can cost you time, processing capacity, emotional regulation, and, in many cases, the ability to meet basic survival needs. A single moment of emotional chaos from someone else might mean we lose the ability to complete a task, cook, clean, eat, or access rest. It derails routines that took enormous effort to build, and then we're the ones blamed for being fragile, when in reality we are managing more complexity with fewer resources than most people will ever understand. So yes, everyone should learn to distinguish between what's a passing discomfort and what's a legitimate violation. But we also must recognize that for many of us, the threshold for what is a violation is lower, not because we're weaker, but because we're already operating under more strain. And that matters. The ones emitting harm must become the ones who adapt. This is why the burden cannot always fall on the most sensitive to stay calm or just let it go. Sometimes we can't let it go, because it wasn't a passing preference. It was a ripple that hit something foundational in our system. That doesn't make us unstable. It makes us honest. So let's flip the cultural script. If someone's emotional energy is consistently destabilizing those around them, they are the one who needs to adapt. They are the one who needs to learn to regulate, reflect, and take responsibility. Not because they are bad, but because their behavior is producing a ripple effect they may not be aware of, and awareness is the first step to accountability. Regulation is not about repression. It's about integrity. This doesn't mean everyone has to be emotionless. It means we all learn to hold ourselves with enough clarity that we're not unconsciously radiating harm and expecting others to absorb it. It means we learn to tell the difference between feeling something and projecting it, having an emotion and emitting emotional pollution, having a preference and violating someone's stability. We all have emotions, but not all of us have learned to take ownership of their impact. And until we do, the people most affected, the disabled, the neurodivergent, the sensitive, the trauma-aware, will continue to carry the cost of a world that refuses to take its emotional field seriously. Lack of emotional awareness is a collective disorder. Yes, a disorder. Not in the clinical, medicalized sense often misused against the neurodivergent or emotionally sensitive, but in the truest sense of the word, a breakdown in natural order, a disruption in relational health, a systemic failure of energetic responsibility, the inability or refusal to become aware of one's emotional emissions, and the denial of their impact on others, is not a personal flaw. It's a cultural epidemic. We live in a world where emotional immaturity is not only common, it's rewarded. Where the loudest person often dominates the space, the calmest person is assumed to be right, and the most sensitive person is labeled the problem. This is not just about individuals behaving badly. It's about an entire society that is emotionally underdeveloped and unwilling to evolve, because doing so would require facing the truth of its own projections. This collective disorder shows up everywhere. Families that pass down generational trauma and call it just how we are, shaming those who break the cycle. Workplaces that reward dominance, urgency, and disconnection, while punishing emotional intelligence as weakness. Spiritual and religious communities that weaponize compassion and bypass conflict in the name of peace. Friendships where people offload emotional chaos and call it just being honest, leaving the other to clean up the mess. Mental health systems that pathologize the reaction to harm while leaving the cause unexamined, especially in sensitive, disabled, or neurodivergent people. In all of these spaces, one pattern repeats. Emotional responsibility is optional for the powerful and required for the vulnerable. And that is not balance. That is injustice. We can and must do better. This isn't a call for perfection. It's a call for awareness. It's a call for maturity. It's a call for a society that finally understands. Emotions are real forces. Projection causes harm. Sensitivity is not weakness, it's diagnostic clarity. Regulation is not repression, it's energetic hygiene. We all emit emotional energy. That energy doesn't stay confined inside of us. It enters the field we share with others. And in that shared space, we all have impact. You do not have the right to pollute that field with unresolved emotional chaos, masked aggression, or unacknowledged fear. Especially when that energy destabilizes others, violates their nervous systems, or burdens them with emotional labor they never consented to. Let's be clear. Just because emotional projection has been normalized doesn't make it natural. Just because society doesn't measure it doesn't mean it's not real. Just because some of us feel it more doesn't mean we're overreacting. It means we're the only ones telling the truth about what's actually happening. We can no longer afford to ignore the emotional ecosystem we all live in. It's time to evolve past the myth of emotional isolation, the idea that what I feel is mine and mine alone. Because when you enter a room, when you speak, when you emote, you're emitting energy into that space. And that energy lands on someone's heart, in someone's gut, against someone's skin, into someone's nervous system. And if we're going to live in shared space, physically, emotionally, relationally, we must learn how to tend that space. Not perfectly, but consciously, willingly, honestly, because doing better isn't about controlling every feeling. It's about being accountable for what we send into the field, and recognizing the very real people who feel it when we're not. Part 7. Protection without disappearing. The right to stand firm. When someone radiates harmful emotional energy, rage, blame, shame, it functions like an invisible weapon. And those who feel it most don't just flinch at tone or get thrown off by vibes. They are responding to real, physiological radiation coming off someone else's body. Energy that disrupts their focus, twists their gut, spikes their heart rate, or collapses their capacity to think clearly. This isn't dramatic. This isn't hypersensitivity. This is what happens when emotional pollution enters the field, and the most attuned systems are the first to register it. But here's the real injustice. When a sensitive person names the harm, when they resist it, when they set boundaries to protect their system, they are often met with dismissal. You're too sensitive. You're overreacting. Why are you making this a big deal? You're the one creating conflict. In that moment, the script flips, and the person impacted by harm becomes the one held responsible for the discomfort in the room. Not the one who caused the energetic disturbance, but the one who dared to respond to it. And so the sensitive person is pushed into an impossible decision, a choice they should never be forced to make. Shrink themselves to avoid further attack. Stay silent and allow the harm to continue, or speak up and get blamed for reacting to what's hurting them. This is a rigged emotional system, and it must be dismantled. Sensitivity does not cancel the right to say no. It is not weakness to protect your system. It is not aggression to name energetic harm. It is not conflict to refuse to collapse under someone else's projection. You have the right to protect your boundaries without disappearing. You have the right to speak up without being pathologized. You have the right to take up space without absorbing what isn't yours. For many of us, especially the disabled, neurodivergent, and trauma-informed, standing firm is not a luxury. It is survival. Our systems literally cannot function when emotional pollution floods the space unchecked. And so we must speak, must name it, must resist, not to attack, but to maintain coherence within ourselves. This is not drama. This is not ego. This is self-preservation in the face of a culture that often protects abusers and punishes those who feel. We don't need permission to protect ourselves. Sensitivity does not make you less entitled to dignity. It makes you more aware of what's really happening, and that awareness gives you the right and the responsibility to set the terms of your participation. You do not have to emotionally vanish to make others feel comfortable. You do not have to tolerate emotional chaos to be seen as peaceful. You do not have to let your body take damage just so someone else doesn't have to confront their own projection. You are allowed to feel deeply and hold boundaries fiercely. You are allowed to protect yourself and stay present. You are allowed to take up space, especially when the space has become harmful. This isn't about conflict. It's about refusing to disappear in a world that would rather silence the truth than confront what it emits. Sensitivity doesn't mean silence. Let's be clear. Controlling your emotional output does not mean suppressing your truth, especially when that truth is logical, measured, and aligned with basic human rights. Not projecting harm does not mean accepting harm. Being calm does not mean being passive, and having empathic clarity does not give others permission to ignore what you feel. Being sensitive does not make you a doormat. It makes you the most accurate sensor in the room. When you feel emotional radiation hitting your system, and without question, that it is not coming from you, you have every right to say stop. You can say, I can feel that energy. It's affecting me. I need you to take responsibility for it. I am not going to absorb this just so you can avoid your own self-awareness. I know the difference between my frequency and yours. This isn't mine. That's not drama. That's not overreaction. That's emotional self-defense. You are allowed to protect your energetic body with the same clarity and firmness you'd protect your physical body, because they are not separate. Standing your ground is not being emotional, difficult, or selfish. In a healthier society, sensitive individuals would be treated like first responders, people who sense emotional disruption early and speak up before it escalates into greater harm. But in this society, they're often treated as the cause of the problem, rather than the one naming it. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a systemic sickness, a culture that protects emotional emitters while silencing emotional receivers. That's not empathy. That's energetic abuse, disguised as normal social dynamics. So let's name this with full clarity. You are allowed to end conversations when the energy becomes toxic. You are allowed to say, "That isn't mine." You are allowed to demand co-regulation, not just endless self-regulation. You are allowed to say, "I need this energy to stop, not just for me, but for truth." This isn't an attack. This is a mature energetic boundary, one grounded in integrity, not reactivity. Final reminder. Empaths deserve safety and strength. You should not have to disappear in order to survive emotional violence. You should not have to suppress your perception to avoid retaliation. You should not have to remain silent just because someone else refuses to face what they are emitting. Sensitivity is not fragility. It is strength in the form of attunement. And standing your ground with clarity is not projection. It's precision. We have spent too long forcing the most perceptive among us to carry the emotional consequences of those who refuse responsibility. We've pathologized the people who feel while excusing the people who emit without care. That ends here. You are not the problem. You are simply the first one to feel it, and the only one honest enough to say it out loud. Part 8. When emotional harm turns into a physical survival threat, there's a common and dangerous assumption in society that a sensitive person who's hurt by someone's emotional energy can simply process it, adapt, or let it go, as if their system is somehow endlessly flexible and durable. But for people living with extreme energetic sensitivity, CPTSD, and physiological executive dysfunction, that expectation is not just wrong, it's life-threatening. If that person is functionally disabled by these reactions, it is actually battery and assault. Over time, it reduces quality of life, and eventually it can lead to organ failure and death or isolation to the point of inhumane living. When your nervous system knows you won't survive another adaptation. For someone like me, emotional energy doesn't just bother me. It destabilizes my entire autonomic nervous system. If someone projects harmful emotional energy at me, and I don't know with clarity and finality that it won't happen again, my body will not calm down. Not because I'm holding a grudge, but because my system has learned, through trauma and survival, that unresolved energy equals danger. And if the situation ends with an expectation that I now have to adapt, do something differently, or emotionally process more on top of what I've already absorbed, my body collapses into shutdown. Not out of resistance, but because there's no more buffer left. This is not psychological avoidance. It's not demand avoidance in the mental sense. It is physiological demand overload. When executive dysfunction is not mental, it's biological. Executive dysfunction is often framed as a psychological or behavioral issue. Disorganization, forgetfulness, procrastination, an inability to just get things done. But for those of us whose systems have spent years surviving unsafe emotional environments, executive dysfunction is not a mental weakness. It is not laziness. It is not a lack of willpower or planning. It is a bodily refusal. It's the physiological braking system of a nervous system that has been pushed past its functional limits, again and again and again. In these states, the problem isn't in the mind. The problem is in the body's energetic depletion, and the body is sending that signal upward to the brain saying, "No more. We cannot do this right now. We will not survive another adaptation." When executive dysfunction is driven by physical or neurological exhaustion, it is not a thinking problem. It's a survival strategy. The pain and overwhelm are somatic, not just psychological. The emotion is traveling from body to brain, not the other way around. And in these cases, trying to treat executive dysfunction with cognitive strategies or mindset coaching doesn't just fail, it adds to the harm. Because the only true solution in these moments is not internal. It's environmental. The interference has to stop. The expectations have to shift. The energy that's draining the system has to be removed. Only then can the system begin to recover its capacity. This is not drama. It's energy economics. For someone living at the edge of survival, neurodivergent, chronically ill, disabled, trauma-sensitized. The math is real and often brutal. If I do this one more thing, I won't have energy left to eat today. If I bend in this conversation again, I'll be in shutdown for 3 days. If I let them put this responsibility on me, I will break in a way I might not come back from. These are not dramatic thoughts. These are accurate calculations, made by a body that knows its limits better than the mind does. They are based on lived experience, on what's happened before, on how long recovery has taken, on how thin the margin of survival has become. When others ignore this, it becomes abuse by inversion. When someone in this state expresses a limit, a boundary, a refusal, a no, and they are met with, "You'll be fine if you just change your mindset. We all have to push through sometimes. You're stronger than you think." It is not support. It is denial of reality. It is emotional coercion dressed up as encouragement. It is asking a collapsing body to give more to protect the comfort of the person who caused the strain. That's not encouragement. That's abuse by emotional inversion, when the victim of the harm is pressured to adapt to the needs of the person who disrupted them. True care honors the body first. If someone's system says, "I can't," the first response should not be to push, fix, or question. It should be, "What needs to stop so your body can come back online? How can I support the conditions for your energy to restore? What's interfering that we need to remove, not override?" Because executive dysfunction isn't always a sign of dysfunction. Sometimes it's the most functional thing your body can do. It's not the problem. It's the alarm. And it deserves to be heard. Resolution is not a luxury. It's a life-saving requirement. What many people fail to understand is that for someone like me, emotional resolution is not optional. It's not a preference. It's not about needing validation. It's not about being dramatic or wanting attention. It is a biological requirement for my nervous system to exit survival mode. If I do not hear and receive with clarity that the projection wasn't mine, that I am not expected to fix what was done to me, that my boundaries are understood and will be respected, that the energy that harmed me will not come back again, then my system cannot recover. Even if I look calm on the outside, even if I'm composed, soft-spoken, or smiling, on the inside, my body is still in red alert, still dysregulated, still carrying the full weight of emotional debris that I was never supposed to absorb in the first place. This isn't about getting people to agree with my emotions. I already regulate my emotions with exact precision. This is about something else, being released from the false burden of processing someone else's unowned energy. Because if I don't get that release, if no one names what happened, or if I'm expected to just let it go without repair, then my body knows, this isn't over. I'm still not safe, and I will collapse trying to hold what was never mine. When survival requires intensity, sometimes people look at someone like me, someone sensitive, attuned, and perceptive, and they see my intensity as a problem. They might think, "Why are you so adamant? You're overstepping. You're not leaving space for others. You're being too forceful." But here's what they don't see. I'm not overstepping people. I'm overstepping a logic. I'm overstepping the collective denial of what harms us. I'm overstepping systems that have failed to protect my basic rights over and over again. I'm not disregarding others. I'm disregarding the things that disregard me. When you've had to survive in a world that doesn't listen, doesn't protect, and doesn't respond until you collapse, adamance becomes a survival tactic. Not because you want to be intense, but because it's the only way to force the needle toward truth when everything around you is designed to ignore it. So when you see someone speaking loudly, urgently, or forcefully about their boundaries, about harm, about what they need in order to feel safe, don't ask, "Why are they so intense?" Ask, "Why did they have to become that intense just to be heard? What happened to them before this moment that taught them no one would protect them unless they pushed this hard?" Because here's the truth. Many of us would not have survived if we didn't learn to be this exacting. If we didn't learn to disregard other people's emotional comfort when it came at the cost of our bodily survival. If we didn't learn to speak over the noise of denial, to force space for ourselves in rooms that refuse to make any. If you want us to soften, then listen the first time. If you want us to become less intense, less urgent, less forceful, then listen the first time we speak. Respond to the harm when it's subtle, not only after we collapse. Create environments where we don't have to fight to be believed. Because intensity is not our preference. It's what happens when gentleness goes ignored for too long. Adapting should not be a death sentence. There is a point where adaptation becomes self-erasure. Where the sensitive person, the disabled person, the trauma survivor, the one who's already bent 1,000 times, is asked to bend once more to preserve someone else's comfort. And at that point, what's being asked is not flexibility. It's not compromise. It's not collaboration. It's a slow demand for disappearance. It's a quiet request for that person to sacrifice their last reserves, not for survival but for social acceptability. When someone says, "I can't do this one more time," believe them. When someone says, "My nervous system won't survive this demand," believe them. And when someone says, "I didn't do anything wrong, and it's not on me to fix this," the only appropriate response is acknowledgement, accountability, and the sacred willingness to let their body release the weight it never should have had to carry in the first place. Because when someone is that close to the edge, what they need is not your explanation, not your defensiveness, not your discomfort in the face of their truth. What they need is for you to finally hold your own emotional field so they no longer have to. Let's stop asking the most perceptive, most sensitive, most burdened among us to keep bending for a world that refuses to move. Let's stop treating survival responses like social problems. Let's stop expecting resilience to stretch past its limit, and then blaming people when they collapse. Adaptation should never be a death sentence. And if we want a world where sensitive people can live, not just survive, then we have to stop asking them to disappear in order to stay. Part 9. The science is real. Everything we've discussed, emotional energy, electromagnetic emissions, nervous system impact, is not fringe. It's not pseudoscience. It's not metaphor. It's measurable. Here are just a few of the scientific foundations that validate the lived experience of sensitive people. 1. The heart emits a measurable electromagnetic field. The human heart generates an electromagnetic field that can be measured several feet away from the body using magnetometers. The HeartMath Institute and other researchers have shown that emotional states affect the frequency and coherence of this field. Calm and loving emotions produce smooth, harmonious wave patterns. Stress and anger produce erratic, chaotic fields. These patterns are detectable in people nearby and can influence their physiology. This means your emotional state doesn't stay inside your body. It radiates. 2. Emotions affect brainwaves, breathing, and nervous system regulation. Research in neurocardiology and psychophysiology confirms that emotions influence brainwave activity, which in turn influences cognition and perception. Breath patterns shift with different emotional states. The autonomic nervous system, sympathetic and parasympathetic, adjusts in real time to emotional input. Dysregulation can be triggered by external stimuli, not just internal thoughts. In short, the body doesn't care whether stress is reasonable. It responds to what's happening in the energetic field. 3. Polyvagal theory explains how we subconsciously detect safety. Developed by Dr. Stephen Porges, polyvagal theory shows that the vagus nerve plays a central role in how we perceive safety and threat. We subconsciously read others' facial expressions, vocal tone, posture, and rhythm. Our bodies constantly scan for cues of safety or danger, a process called neuroception. Even without conscious awareness, we feel when someone's energy is threatening or dysregulated. This explains why some people feel off, even when they're saying the right words. Your body knows what their nervous system is actually emitting. 4. Mirror neurons and interpersonal neurobiology show emotional entrainment. Our brains are wired to synchronize with others. Studies show that mirror neurons fire in response to others' emotional expressions. This allows us to feel empathy and co-regulate in relationships. However, it also means we involuntarily absorb others' emotional states, especially if we're sensitive. You're not imagining it when you start to feel disoriented, tense, or fatigued around someone with chaotic energy. Your nervous system is literally syncing with theirs. 5. Sensitive systems process more input, and differently. Research on sensory processing sensitivity (SPS), autism spectrum conditions, and neurodivergence shows that some people process sensory and emotional input more deeply. They show stronger brain activation in areas related to empathy, awareness, and nuance. They take longer to return to baseline after emotional disruption. Their executive function and physical regulation are more easily overloaded by environmental interference. This isn't fragility. It's neurological difference, and it demands respect, not ridicule. 6. The body holds trauma and remembers energy. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, in The Body Keeps the Score, outlines how trauma isn't just a memory. It's stored in muscle, fascia, breath, posture, and regulation patterns. Similarly, Dr. Gabor Mate emphasizes that chronic stress and suppressed emotion manifest as physical illness. Emotional suppression is a cultural epidemic. Healing requires creating environments that validate and regulate emotional truth. These principles support what many sensitive people already know. If the emotional environment is harmful, the body will carry the cost. 7. Emerging fields: biofield science, electrophysiology, and energy medicine. A growing number of researchers are now studying what's long been dismissed: the biofield, a complex, dynamic field of electromagnetic and possibly quantum energy surrounding the body. Institutions, including the National Institutes of Health (NIH), are funding research into how energetic fields correlate with emotion, intention, and health, how stress and trauma show up in the field before they appear as symptoms, how energy-based interventions like breath, coherence training, and biofeedback can restore regulation. This isn't mysticism. It's biology catching up with what sensitive people have always felt. Conclusion: you're not making this up. Science is on your side. The lived experience of sensing emotional energy is real. The physiological impact of others' emotional emissions is real. The collapse of function in response to unresolved projection is real. And the social gaslighting that tells you it's just in your head is not only wrong, it's abusive. You are not broken. You are not too much. You are not imagining things. You are living with a level of attunement and honesty that most of society has not yet developed the capacity to face. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you advanced. And you have every right to name the energy you feel, to demand environments that don't harm your system, and to build a life around resonance, not resilience. Because this isn't just sensitivity. It's intelligence. It's protection. It's science. It's truth.